We often talk about our 7 principles, summarized here in the words above my head. They're a little bit longer for those of you who don't know, and they're great. But we also have 6 sources which our living tradition draws from, and they often get overlooked. And I want to share them with you because I think they're actually just as important to our identity, as our 7 principles are, just in terms of understanding who we are. The words and deeds of prophetic people which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. We draw from wisdom from the world's religions, which inspires us in our ethical and spiritual life. Jewish and Christian teachings which call us to respond to God's love by loving our neighbor as ourselves. Humanist teachings which counsel us to heed the guidance of reason and the results of science and warn us against idolatries of the mind and spirit. Spiritual teachings of earth-centered religion traditions which celebrate the sacred circle of life and instruct us to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. But I don't think it's by chance that our first source is direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder, affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of the spirit and an openness to the forces which create and uphold life. I think that part is so central to our identity as Unitarian Universalists, the idea that comes through us through many, but particularly through Emerson and the Transcendentalists. That is such an important part of our heritage, that sense that we do not need someone or something to mediate between us and the divine, or whatever one might call it. And I want to talk about names for a second, for that transcending ministry. For Ralph Waldo Emerson, it was the Oversoul, the divine spirit or mind that was present in every human and in all of nature. It was an all-pervading, omniscient, supreme mind, a reflection of the reality that we are all part of nature, each other, and God. Now, of course, some of you may not actually resonate with the term God. And I think that's part of the thing about these names, is that it's so hard to actually do the naming. God may be the most common term used in our culture and in our world, but there are so many more. And when I say God, I may have a very different understanding of God than a fundamentalist Christian, which would be different from an Orthodox Jew or a pagan. And yet there are also many Christians, Jews, pagans, Hindus, Muslims, many of them mystics, who have a conception of God that is meaningful to me, and agnostic who isn't even sure if there is a God. Because what is God anyway? And that's the problem, the challenge with the word God. Its meaning can be both too limiting and too vague at the same time. Yet, as Wesley Wildman writes, our species is obsessed with trying to F the ineffable, to limn the liminal, to conceive the inconceivable, to speak the unspeakable, to say the unsayable. And this obsession shoots colorful threads through the tapestry of human language, and especially religious language. And so we have many different words beyond just God, goddess, or spirit of life, which has become so dear to many of us Unitarian Universalists, theists, agnostics, and atheists alike. Indeed, there are numerous words and poetic phases we use to F the ineffable. Eternal love, blessed spirit, oneness, the divine, creation, the infinite, that which is in and between all things, nudging discomfort, great spirit, source of all, joyful darkness far beyond our seeing, great mystery, that which is known by many names and no name at all. And those last few speak to the fact that we just can't name it. Even when we try as hard as we can to draw that circle wider, to encompass something more expansive than what we might initially be thinking of, we are still drawing a circle about something that has no boundaries. When I hear God, I typically translate it into one of these other words or phrases that's meaningful to me. But for me, naming isn't the most important thing. It's that direct experience of connection to that unnameable, what our first source calls that transcending mystery and wonder, which matters. And I've had moments where I felt connected to something greater than myself, not just intellectually, but somewhere deep in my being. A sense of oneness with the universe, a sense of oneness with creation, where I could really feel myself as part of that interdependent web of existence. As Emerson writes, it comes as insight, it comes as serenity and grandeur. And one of the most common and profound ways that it shows up is that experience of unity with all of creation or with God. And Emerson describes these moments as a direct connection between the soul and the divine, where there is no barrier between the two, and we are filled with the divine. And what Emerson is describing is a transcendent or mystical experience. And of course, one can find mysticism in pretty much every major religion. The Kabbalah in Judaism, Sufism in Islam. From Thomas Aquinas and Thomas Burton in Christianity to the mystical experiences of Guru Nanak, the founder of the Sikh religion. In our own Unitarian Universalist history, writes the Reverend Joan Javier Duval, we indeed have a rich mystical tradition, not a mysticism based on belief in a supernatural God or a deity way up in the heavens who talks to us, but rather in an internal experience of the sacred. The Transcendentalists, one set of our Unitarian forebears, best expressed this kind of mystical experience. Emerson, Margaret Fuller, and Henry David Thoreau were all transcendentalist mystics who emphasized intuition as the best way to know the world. Their brand of mysticism emphasized the felt knowledge of a deeper truth of being one with the universe. And this knowledge for them was often found in nature. And while such moments often have religious components, transcendent or mystical experiences can happen to anyone, regardless of religious training or inclinations. They often occur unexpectedly and without anticipation or preparation, and they can happen at any time, and they might not even be understood as religious experiences at all. It might be an artist experiencing a deep feeling of interconnectedness in a moment of flow, perhaps. Or maybe it's a loss of a sense of self. A scientist who has a spontaneous, ecstatic inspiration, or it might even be dismissed as psychological disturbances in our modern times. And these moments often happen in natural settings. And, I've felt a profound sense of interconnectedness on a mountaintop, sitting by a stream, and while working in the garden, watching the little shoots pop up from the soil out of seed. But they don't have to happen in nature either. The Catholic mystic Thomas Merton had his mystical experience in the center of a busy shopping district in Louisville. This is the plaque that was erected at the spot where it happened. Where he had this moment of suddenly being overwhelmed with the realization that I loved all of those people. That they were mine and I was theirs. That we could not be alien to one another even though we were total strangers. It was like waking from a dream of separateness. This sense of liberation from an illusory difference was such a relief and such a joy to me that I almost laughed out loud. I've been moved by the Spirit in sanctuaries like this one, and while singing along with thousands of strangers at a Radiohead concert. I've had life-changing insights in quiet contemplation and in the midst of deep conversation, and then in ecstatic experiences of ego dissolution where I felt at one with the universe. They come in many different shapes and sizes, and while they can happen anywhere, they are by no means common, especially those big ones. We can't create them or bring them about, although we can help lay the groundwork to help make them happen. And we can make conscious attempts to have them. Really only those rare people can really tap into those deep experiences on a regular basis. And yet we can, with intention, all of us, each one of us, can open ourselves up to the possibility of these experiences, especially those smaller moments of connecting with a deeper wisdom. And the thing about these transcendent experiences, these mystical experiences, is that they're not something that we can easily grasp or recall. Margaret Fuller, Emerson's contemporary and leading transcendentalist, wrote, "To one who has enjoyed the full life of any scene, of any hour, what thoughts can be recorded about it seem like the commas and semicolons in the paragraph, mere stops. And if we cannot fully recall that moment ourselves, they are all but impossible to describe to someone else." That's the challenge of actually delivering a sermon about mystical experiences. Any description cannot even come close to describing the actual experience. Although many have tried, and I do love Reverend Jacob Trapp's description. I like to think of mysticism as the art of meeting reality, he says. The art of richer and deeper awareness. It is an experience that comes unbidden. It is not the intellectual conviction that being itself is my being, but rather an ineffable experience of that oneness, flooding in to overwhelm our illusion of aloneness, separateness. There are moments when life feels vivid and resplendent, when more than a mortal splendor breaks in, and when there is a touch of grandeur and of glory in just being alive. So describing it is difficult. But I can tell you what it's done for me. These moments have helped me find peace at ease during times of difficulty, as Linda talked about in her reflection too. As if being held by a deep love. But I think the most important thing they have done for me is change the way I view myself in relation to the world, in relation to others, and thus the way I act. You see, when I see that my life is bound up with others, that my salvation is bound up with other people, including those I might otherwise think of antagonists or even enemies, once you see that deep humanity in everyone, it's hard to unsee it. Sure, I might forget it from time to time. And I certainly have had those moments where I continue to be more egotistical, many of them, in fact. But that realization that we are caught in what Martin Luther King Jr. called an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny, helps me find the inspiration to work for justice and equality, even when times are hard, even when in despair. It is that memory, it is that feeling that calls me on, that calls me forward. And those moments where I truly felt a sense of interconnectedness with all of creation, it's been a feeling that, however fleeting, continues to ground and indeed be the core of my faith. Now, not all of them have been wholly pleasant. I remember being in the mountains and witnessing a huge area that had been scarred by fire, and I experienced a deep and profound sense of loss. that extended well beyond the forests and into my own being. And the power of that is the power that when I realize how intertwined my life is with the rest of the natural world, I am inspired, I am compelled to act. I'm reminded of the words of ecologist and activist John Seed, who says about his work defending the rainforest that he had this realization. I'm not defending the rainforest. I am the rainforest, recently emerged into consciousness, defending myself. Once I cease seeing myself as separate from nature, I realize that it's actually in my self-interest to defend it. And I'm not normally one to promote selfishness as a good place from which to act. But when I understand myself as part of the whole, well, that's a different story. Yesterday, I know some people probably had maybe a smaller experience of that, as over a dozen people connected to Emerson joined in a workday with the Sky Valley volunteers. And we worked to pot acorns and grow new oak trees and create seed bombs filled with native seeds that'll be used to help restore the local ecosystems in our area that have been damaged or devastated by wildfires and droughts and beetle infestations. It's a reminder that we are caring not only for our local ecosystems, but that we are thereby also caring for ourselves. And these moments are so profound, so changing. I honestly wish more people could have and recognize and hold on to those moments. As Thomas Merton wrote of his experience, if only everybody could realize this, but it can't be explained. There is no way of telling people that they are all walking around shining like the sun. If only they could all see themselves as they really are. If only we could all see each other that way all the time. There would be no more war, no more hatred, no more cruelty, no more greed. But this cannot be seen, only believed and understood. So as I close, as I come to the close of this sermon and of this service, I ask you to think about what might you do to experience a deeper sense of connection with the eternal, whatever name you call it by, or how you conceive it. What might you do to tap into that feeling of interconnectedness with all that is? How might you open yourselves to these moments? Not necessarily a massive, earth-shattering moment. Maybe just listening to that still, small voice within. Tapping into that deeper reality that you might otherwise ignore in your daily life. I can't tell you how to make it happen. I can't tell you how it will change you, but I know it's worth it.